Den of Geek and Talking Strange fans. Aaron Sagers here, and I am joined by the director of It Lives Inside, Bishal Dutta. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
This film, I'm really excited about it. And it's been getting a lot of good buzz because this really introduces elements of Indian ghost lore to Western audiences. And the framework is very much like young person, kind of teen horror, except with this whole new entity. When you were a kid, talk to me about learning about this entity from Indian lore.
Well, beyond Indian lore, it actually comes from my own family. I heard stories about this stuff. So let me tell you a story. My grandfather told me, I grew up hearing this, that one time as a young man, my grandfather in India went to a family friend's house, and the friend's daughter would carry around this jar, this empty jar, and speak to it. And my grandfather says, you know, there's nothing in there, right? So she opens the jar angrily and tosses something at him, but nothing comes out, right? And so he goes home, he doesn't think anything of it, and that night he's hearing knocking at the door, and then he starts hearing galloping horses or something, and the big one is one day he leaves out a pack of peanuts, and he turns around, he hears chewing, and then they're gone, right? And so he leaves the house. So this is a story I grew up hearing, and these kinds of stories are just all over our culture and all over the history of our culture. And what was great was, as once I moved to America, I really started loving horror films and the experience of horror films and the communal experience of horror films. And when I was thinking about making my first movie, I went back to that story. And the thought was, that the American audience, they're so used to a certain kind of horror that I really love, to be clear. And so my thought was, if I can bring something new to something that feels familiar, to me, that's the key to what makes an audience love something, that they understand its sort of conceptual framework, but that they can come to it and go, okay, this is something unique within that framework. Mm-hmm.
Well, and there's this immediate relatability with the story and the character, because it's a young girl who's going to school and wanting to sort of divest herself of her heritage, and she just wants to blend in. I think every teenager, probably every person, can relate to that, but especially if you're coming from a culture and you feel like you're standing out in another place, you just don't want to make any waves. So then you add to that this sort of supernatural threat. That's very, well, maybe not supernatural threat always, but it's a very relatable kind of story.
Well, and what I love about what you just said, it's the intention of the movie was never for it to be limited to a certain audience or a certain demographic or even a certain age range. Because to me, what I'm trying to make films about, what my partners at QC and Neon are trying to make films are about, are universal emotions. And I love what you just said, because it is true that we all feel that way in high school. We all want to blend in. We all feel different. And it's only when you start growing up that you start to embrace what is unique about you. And in this particular case, the supernatural element, it fit very well into that framework of that emotional story, because the creature, the Pishash in this case, in our cultural text, it feeds on loneliness, it feeds on negativity and insecurity and these things. And I thought, okay, what better creature to go after teenagers than this? Mm-hmm. And it just perfectly kind of meshed with what the film was going to be about.
Yeah. What are some of the rules or unique signatures of this entity that kind of makes it stand out a little bit?
Well, the Pishash, the way it operates is in a very ethereal way. It's often invisible, and it often can shapeshift. We focus a lot of the invisibility in this film. I think that was a huge part of it for me, in that I subscribe to the school of Jaws and Alien, where the lesser seen, the more that the monster is in the audience's mind, the scarier that it is. So those inherent rules gave us the opportunity to really build up a hype within the audience for what is this thing, what is its physical form. And then the other thing is that component of the more lonely that you feel, the more mentally unstable that you feel, the stronger that it gets. What we loved was this idea that it's not a thing that kills you. It feeds on you, but it feeds on your emotions. And we thought that was so rich with possibilities and so unique overall.
Yeah, it's like fear fuel.
Fear fuel. That's a really great way to put it. Yes.
Yeah. Do you think this is a film that you could have made like 10 years ago? Do you think the industry, the landscape would have been ready for it?
I don't think so. I really don't, because I think that a watershed moment was Get Out. Right. I think Jordan Peele's Get Out, which QC Entertainment, who produced this movie, they produced that movie as well. That was such a watershed because I think that the conversation around race was very monolithic before. And I think that what Get Out did was it gave us all permission to tell stories that weren't just about the binary of racism or not racism. Get Out is such a complex film. This is a movie really less about outward racism or experiences of racism and more about how we feel inside and what is kind of the internal insecurity that exists. And I think that kind of complexity, I mean, look, the horror genre has been fueling this cultural conversation for decades. It's one of the richest genres that's out there. But I think in this case, to have a film like this come out, to be supported by great producers, to be supported by like a distributor like Neon, you know, I think it speaks to certain changes, certain advancement that have been made in the industry, but also to, you know, kind of the strength and the core sort of belief in the mission that my partners have.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because, you know, we talk about more representation, which is certainly important. And a lot of times, though, the conversation goes in the direction of more representation on screen, important, and stories that are important and artistic. However, we also need to talk about the popcorn fare
Yes.
of it all.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you bring that up. For me, the popcorn of it all is what made me go to see the movies when I was a kid. And I can never let that go. That is what defines all this. I remember going to see The Conjuring and kids daring each other to go see it because it was so scary. And when we got there, and I then showed my parents that film, and the screams, the recoiling, like that very physical kind of propulsive experience of watching a horror film, I'm very attached to. And as a result, you know, I think it's so important that we are, to your point, that we are expanding the horizons in terms of storytelling, but also that the audience feels like they get what they came for. I mean, I subscribe a lot to Steven Soderbergh's idea of almost what he called Trojan horse cinema, right? Which is the idea that you bring the audience in for genre, you deliver on that, and then there's real estate to provide them something more.
Yeah. And I know that you're not a filmmaker that is going to be strictly identified by your cultural heritage. And yet this film, are you excited about the fact that Indian and Indian American kids out there are going to have something that is kind of theirs? It speaks to their myths, their lore, and, you know, because certainly there's been everything else that's been represented for a long time, and just not a lot of movies like this distributed in North America.
It's a real privilege. It genuinely is. And again, I just applaud my partners for believing that much in the film. But yes, I mean, it's a film that I constantly thought about what would I have wanted to see when I was 13, 14. And then seeing actual kids get to see it and talking to them afterwards, it's incredibly gratifying. And at the end of the day, what I get out of telling a story that's so rooted in my culture is ultimately what every artist kind of hopes for, is the opportunity to do something real for them. And when I'm writing this movie, I'm not so much thinking about anything macro or big picture, but I'm getting to say, okay, a lot of these are my experiences. This is what it was like for me. And so I'm getting to tell what feels like a truthful and honest story and do it in an entertaining way. And I think that really has always been at the core of what's made movies work.
Yeah. Given the opportunity, is this something where you would like to explore other kind of phenomena, monsters, ghosts, and other creepy crawlies from Indian lore? Would you bring others to the screen?
I absolutely would. I think it's an incredibly untapped well of great stories. And I think our culture has a mythology that is just robust and bursting at the seams with great kind of stories and concepts. And absolutely, I think I'm always wanting to hear what the audience thinks. I want their feedback, but I feel strong about this. I think that these concepts are universally relatable, but they feel new, right? And that's the balance we're all looking for. So absolutely, I'm wanting to bring more stories and more mythologies to the table for Western audiences.
It's also just scary as hell. I mean, that's scary. The thing is like this is a great monster, so a great creature. So I'm very excited for everyone to see it. And It Lives Inside comes out September 22nd, 2023.
That's right.
That's right. So we're just like about 2 months out from it, man.
Yes.
I'm very excited for it. I'm very excited about this film because it's a fun ride, but also a whole new chapter and horror. So, Bishal, thank you so much for your time, my friend.
Thank you. This was lovely. Thank you so much.